Yeah, my name is Jim Halbeisen, and this is my opinion. Today we're talking about foliar feeding, the different principles of it, and how it works. So at this point, James, if you want to introduce yourself and start with the questions.
My name is James Schiltz, with Growers Mineral here for about a year now. This morning I had the pleasure to visit with Jim Halbeisen, and we would like to talk about foliar feeding and how the Growers Mineral product fits in that dynamic. As the season's coming up on us, it's a good window of opportunity to boost plant. As you view this video, please take note to the time stamps that are explaining which topic was discussed when, so feel free to view that and take a look and glean what you would like as we go. So with that, Jim, what can you tell me from your experience? We were earlier talking about the Michigan State research. I actually live in Michigan, and I think that's pretty pertinent. Mm-hmm. It's from the 1950s. Would you articulate that a little? They were measuring isotopes.
Basically, when growers started in business, Victor Tejan's idea was that we can start the plant, get it healthy, with application in the soil, but he was hoping to bypass the soil and go directly to the plant. So his idea was that the type of materials he's using to formulate the product would be successful with the foliar feeding. And at that point in agri-science, they were saying that all nutrients had to be absorbed through the roots. And Tejan's was in disagreement with that and thought that the plant could absorb it through the leaf. If you look at the history of plants and how they evolved out of the prehistoric oceans into the atmosphere, the roots were developed in order to keep access to minerals that were in the soil. Originally, the plant leaves that were suspended in the water were able to absorb the nutrients directly into the leaf. And so Tejan's felt they still had that ability once they came out of the prehistoric waters. And so there was quite a bit of debate about that at that time. After World War II, the discussion of atomic science changed. Up to that point, chemistry was all descriptive. And then with the breaking of the atom and the atomic bomb, that changed the whole focus of chemistry. Molecular association and the way it worked was taught totally different. And so what Tejan's thought he could do is go ahead and spray it on the leaf and get success from it. And everybody was questioning that. And then when they came along with foliar herbicides, it was the same situation. Will these sprayed on the plant work for what they wanted to do with the plants that they were going after? And so with the dropping of the atomic bomb during World War II, the U.S. was looking for research with radioactive isotopes. These are individual minerals that are excited through the radioactivity, and then you could monitor it with a Geiger counter. So what Michigan State University did is they applied for the grants to do this work, and they were foliar feeding plants with radioactive isotopes. And see, the U.S. government was interested in that because they wanted to show that the breaking of the atom was just not for destructive purposes like the atom bomb, but could be used for positive things. And what Michigan State discovered was that plants had the ability to absorb nutrients when they are applied to the leaf. And the one that was of particular interest was phosphorus. That was shown to absorb into the plant and then disperse through the plant very uniformly. Something like calcium, which is just the exact opposite, when you sprayed it on the leaf, it didn't distribute through the plant whatsoever. It kind of stayed right in the leaf area. Whereas if they took that radioactive isotope calcium and put it in the root, man, it would flush right up and through the total plant itself. And see, that's really the basis of the growers program. apply phosphorus to the plant and then use the calcium to oxidize the soil so that the plant has the ability to search the soil for nutrients. And see, the other thing about the foliar feeding is when you get that permeation or movement through the plant, that the plant can also put these nutrients into the sugars and push them out into the root zone, which we see is very helpful to the microbes that are surrounding the plant root. So when a guy's foliar feeding, he's not only feeding the plant, he's also feeding the microbes that are there in the soil. And that can be a very big benefit for long-term effect. If the plant doesn't need that phosphorus immediately, it's pushed down into the root zone in the sugar. The microbes get it. They'll put it in their tissue, and then when the plant calls for it in a time of stress, the microbes can deliver it to the plant. So foliar feeding has a...
So when we talk about foliar feeding, too, that you bring up a good point, phosphorus being more plant mobile would be key to stimulating the energy production in that plant. But calcium, on the other hand, would not really move in the plant cell because the plant cells are negative. I was just reading an article talking about that, and that calcium being positive versus phosphorus being negative, that calcium gets stuck and doesn't move real far in plant tissue.
Yeah,
when it's foliar fed, especially.
Its usage is totally different too. In other words, calcium is going to be more structural. There is some need in the cytoplasm of the cell for calcium to structure like the mitochondria correctly, whereas the phosphorus is totally need for the transfer of energy. You know, you go from ADP, adenosine diphosphate, up to adenosine triphosphate, and you've got to have plenty of phosphorus in the cell fluid in order for it to work correctly. And see,
that's really the, I mean, to simplify that, though, that's really the energy production system of the plant.
That's right.
That's why we get such a response from using the growers 10-20-10, 20% phosphorus, because we're stimulating energy production and conversion of organic radicals from one form to another.
That's right. The usage when an animal consumes sugar, for example, or a form of sugar, that energy doesn't go directly into the muscle to give you energy. You have to work through the phosphate chain in order for that to happen. That's why having plentiful phosphorus in a plant or an animal, it's the key for energy transfer. But the thing about phosphorus that's very interesting is its mobility and pulling elements with it. We feel that having
because of the fact that it's a negative, right?
Yeah, again, I'd have to look at the physiology of that part of it. But my knowledge is that the phosphorus will pull the micronutrients with it. It'll pull the major elements, nitrogen and potassium, with it also. So, and see, farmers have to realize, and just about every farmer is using Roundup, and see, what is Roundup? Glyphosate. See, the radical that is harmful to certain plants that are not genetically modified, it is pulled by the phosphorus that's in the glyphosate molecule. So that we're doing basically the same thing as they are with Roundup, only they're trying to kill tissue and we're trying to feed tissue and make it more alive.
Yeah, Roundup's really interrupting that photosynthesis molecule, but as we foliar feed growers, we're stimulating that ATP, so really kind of polar opposite processes there.
That's exactly right.
So,
that's exactly right.
And it's important to think about the mobility of nutrients in a plant, calcium not being mobile. Once it sets it's in a place in a particular cell, it will not move, as opposed to nitrogen. You'll get firing on the bottom of a corn plant. You'll get nitrogen being moved from old tissue to new tissue to be needed in the new growth, but that will not happen with calcium.
Calcium will move, but it only goes up in the plant. Its ability to translocate from the top of the plant down That's what they showed at Michigan State. When they radio tagged calcium, what they put on the leaf would not end up in the root zone.
Right.
But what they would put in the root zone would end up into the tissue of the plant. And then your point of what it's used for structurally within the cell, it's not part of the energy cycle. It's basically more of the structural cycle of the plant.
And to add on to your comment of it won't move to the root. So basically, that's old tissue. Mm-hmm. It won't go to preformed tissue. It only goes to where they're forming new tissue. Right?
Yeah, and again, that's just that's the system of Mother Nature, basically. Because again, when you put phosphorus on the leaf, it'll flow right to the root with no problem. So evidently, that need for the energy package of the phosphorus allows the mobility to be much better of the compound itself.
So all the more important that we follow that growers program of proactively putting on sufficient calcium up front, incorporating that into soil profiles so that it's oxidized, like you said earlier, opened up and breathing biologically, functioning well,
right.
And then nutrient exchange happens at a higher rate.
See, the thing about calcium that's so important is you're doing a lot of different things with it. In other words, probably the biggest factor is that you're trying to chemically, through flocculation, increase your porosity. Then the next thing you're doing, which may be equally the same, would be feeding the biological. Because again, we as animals have a certain demand for calcium in our structure, and the microbes have the same demand for calcium. And see, once they improve, the sugar exudation that they're putting out helps with the structure of the soil. But the third thing you do with calcium is you feed the plant, because you need it as part of the structure. And really, that can be a very small portion of what the calcium need is for. Probably the biggest need is for the porosity and the air induction into the soil. But you have other factors that you need too. So this idea that you can put on way too much calcium, you need a lot of calcium to really get success.
Would you agree that I think on the average, the industry has an insufficient amount of calcium in most soil profiles? As we talked about it this winter, I've looked at lots of soil tests in the past, and I think you would agree that they're just at an industry insufficient level.
Yeah. Well, they are not looking at it. Number one, in my opinion, they're not looking at the aeration factor and giving it that credit. Some people do talk about it, but kind of in a hush-hush tone. And we're looking at it from a pH standpoint. And to me, it's strictly because that's a very easy test to monitor, to do. And again, it does have some validity, but really the aeration is the big part of it. And then, having the calcium content you need so that you got proper structure within the plant to facilitate the energy, which you're trying to increase with the phosphorus. We're just trying to build more sugar. It's just that simple. And the healthier that tissue is, the more aeration we have, the better that job will get done. Because as farmers, that's what we got to realize. What are we selling? Our job is to trap radiant energy, convert it into chemical energy, which is sugar. And that's what we're selling. When you haul corn, you haul beans, you haul cantaloupe, you're selling sugar. It's just that simple.
Yeah, so we've covered having sufficient calcium in that soil profile, and we've also covered how that phosphorus works for energy production. Like you said, our whole system is harnessing solar energy. So now can we talk a little about, there's 3 points I'd like to touch on, timing, rates, and then the water we use for foliar feeding.
Yeah. And we were talking previously about, foliar feeding of minerals versus foliar feeding of, say, like a herbicide, for example. Again, the chemical principle of likes dissolve likes plays very big into that. In other words, when you're spraying an organic radical like 2,4-D or the soybean version of it today, that is an organic compound. So its ability to go into the structure of the leaf is much better than when you're spraying something like nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium. Those are inorganic minerals, and they don't move into the leaf near as easily. So you have to pick certain times of day when you put those minerals on to get your best success. And our experience has been, late in the evening, early in the morning when you have dew fall, and then you dissolve those minerals into the dew, and then when the plant pulls that dew fall back into its structure, it'll pull those minerals with it. Now, if you spray and there's no water to dissolve those minerals, they can lay there right on the surface, but sometimes they get enough moisture to burn the leaf tissue. So again, to try to prevent that, you try to have as much moisture accumulation onto the leaf as you possibly can get.
And evening seems to be lots of feedback about timings. We were actually discussing that this morning on our conference call. There's just more time for absorption happen throughout the night.
Yeah, and that's some of our research is indicating that the energy of the sun, we have a change in the atmosphere so that certain portion of the electromagnetic spectrum is changing, which will affect how the product is absorbed into the plant itself. There's always been a debate in the industry or in growers' industry about whether the morning spray is better or the evening spray is better. And again, farmers have to kind of work with that to try to figure out, and management is part of that, when it's time to foliar spray and you've been working hard all day, you get a little tired of spraying all night or getting up super early and spraying. So again, it has to fit your management scheme also. But and another thing that we didn't talk about is carrying higher pressure so that you're atomizing that particular fluid that you're putting on.
Right.
And then mixing the growers with water, that's another issue because the activity of the growers is very high, and when you mix it with hard water, you can end up with precipitate in that hard water, and that's something that has to be addressed. And see,
that's been interesting to travel the country to see the different waters, and even our annual meeting, we brought in waters from around the country, and there's some wide variety of total dissolved solid levels.
It's a very big challenge to our sales force to educate them, to help educate the customer. I mean, the human element looks at water in a glass and they think it's all the same, and that could be farther from the truth. See, so
absolutely,
that we have to find out what that special, uniqueness of that water is, and total dissolved solids is probably the biggest one. And so where does that come from? Well, in wells, it's coming when the rain falls on the surface. You evaporate water off of the surface of the earth. That's like a distillation process that goes up into the clouds. And so rainwater has very little to no dissolved minerals in it. That works perfectly with growers because there's nothing to interact with the grower's product. Once it strikes the surface of the earth, as it percolates through, it picks up different minerals, and these different minerals are what reacts with the grower's product. So that's why when farmers look at foliar feeding with us, or even just mixing water with growers, the sales force has to be very particular to look what that water hardness is or what the characteristics are. And like you said, they're all over the board. And see, you can use certain types of tests, like use a dissolved solid meter or do a pH of it. And you have certain characteristics that the growers reacts a certain way, but there's really only one positive test. You mix it 15 parts of water to 1 part of growers, and now you'll know what the activity of that water is when you start adding growers to it.
No matter if it's just water and growers being mixed or any other tank mix opportunities, guys are talking about insecticides, fungicides, etc. Always do that jar test.
Yeah, that's right. That's very good. When you start mixing chemicals, and we've had people that were so-called water experts say, water is a chemical. And see, when you mix chemicals, You have no idea what's going on, and the only test you have is the jar test. And farmers really resist that because, again, that's just another thing they have to measure and then take into consideration when they're putting this together. Everybody would like a nice prescription that solves all your problems, but
If we want to talk numbers in TDS, I mean, I'm curious in your input, but it seems that 100 to 150, maybe 200 could be tolerated mixing with the growers.
right.
If we're mixing 8 gallons water to, say, 2 gallons growers for a foliar application, that's one thing. If we're closer to 50-50, so 2 gallons water, 2 gallons growers, now we shouldn't have as much of a problem. It's always going to depend on what nutrients. So really a water test will show us hardness and what nutrients are making up that hardness.
Yep.
Will tell us more because different nutrients act different. But then if we start getting up to 400, 600, 800, 1,000, and I've even seen 2,000 TDS, we're definitely going to have problems. We do not want to go there.
Yeah, and you're dead on there. The only thing I will say is one of our district managers had one that was almost 900 TDS, and we did 15-to-1 test, and it never precipitated at all.
Yeah, there's a few cases where that happens,
Absolutely.
and I don't remember that off the top of my mind, but I think it's related to what nutrients are in there. Right?
Yeah, well, again, that's probably true. But when the farmer is pulling that out of the new well that he just dropped, and you looked at the TDS and it appeared high, and then when he mixed it with the growers and it worked fine, that's what he's basically interested in. So that's why that jar test is just really the thing you need to hang your hat on, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So the idea of the jar test, I just feel is paramount for all farmers, and we're seeing it also in application. A lot of guys are adding more water when they in-furrow or they 2x2. And see, again, like if you get into a squeeze pump in a 2x2 position, you don't have to worry about particulate matter in there. And really that works fine because usually the particulate matter is a compound that the soil microbes can break apart. So again, but if you have to use screens and orifices, any kind of particulate matter is going to be a problem. So guys have to be very aware of that. And the other thing that you brought up is very true, when you do an equal volume of growers and an equal volume of water, usually the ingredients in the growers overcome the dissolved solid load that's in there. The only thing is when you mix them together, always make sure you have the growers in the tank first and then add the water, because you'll always be under the 1-to-1. If you got the water in first, the first growers you're maybe at 50-to-1. And sometimes it'll resolubilize, but I've seen times when it wouldn't resolubilize. So always, if you're doing 1-to-1 with hard water, make sure you got the growers in the tank first and then add the water second.
Growers is the first in the mixing order.
Right.
Fair enough. Rates, obviously there's a lot of crops, a lot of different water volumes. I'm thinking about blueberries that I guess the truck driver was telling me they were delivering yesterday.
Right.
I mean, we might be 40 or 100 gallons an acre in that kind of environment. So then it's really going to matter to do testing. Right. We get down to 2 gallons an acre in a mist sprayer with 2 gallons of water. Very different scenarios. But what have you seen in the industry for rates? 2 seems to be the common, and it depends on frequency.
The common rate is how common is the farmer.
Fair.
Because, you have vegetable guys that'll do 40 gallon per acre and they'll have 39 of water and what are growers. As far as the rate of growers is concerned, that depends on, what you're trying to do. If you're spraying every week, if you're spraying every 3 days, what total volume you want to get in for the season. When you get into row crops, most guys are doing 2 gallons per acre once or twice a season, And most of those guys are using anywhere from 4 total gallons up to maybe 10 or 15 total gallons. The biggest thing is to make sure your pressure is high enough so that you're atomizing the spray. You want as many fine particles on that leaf surface as you can get, because that will encourage the penetration into the cuticle. And the other issue is the coarser it is, the more it'll tend to run off of the leaf also. So there is like an electrostatic pull between the plant and a very fine water molecule. So I tell guys, when you're going down through that field, it looks like you're pulling a fog blanket behind you. And then that'll rest. And a lot of times, if your row center isn't closed, the electrostatic pull of the plant will pull that small, fine water molecule or mixture molecule to the plant itself. And so you get most of it. It falls on the ground. You're not losing it, but its effectiveness is not near as quick as if you can get it right on the plant leaf.
Absolutely won't be absorbed through the cuticle as quickly and into the xylem or phloem of the plant, moving into needed areas to stimulate energy production.
Yep. Exactly.
Airplanes, typically are running at 2-3 gallons an acre total. There's a good place for it. Drones are now becoming. As I travel, we've had some reps with drones.
Yep.
Saw some spread and cover crop here last week in Michigan. That's definitely a good place for it. And the prop wash, from what I understand, is pretty good at pushing that through the canopy.
Yeah. No, the aircraft has been good, for many years. Again, you got that down pressure, and you watch those guys when they're putting it on. You can tell it's just like they're pulling a blanket through there, and you got that push down in there. Some of the things now with fungicide that they're starting to be more clinical with the airplane is if they're getting it down farther into the canopy, because some of these fungicides are being put on, at tasseling time, and they want the total plant covered. And see, anything that would work well in a fungicide would work well for growers. The more of the plant that can be covered, even the stem will absorb nutrients. So the more of the plant you can get covered when you're spraying a foliar application, the more success you'll have with entry into the plant.
Absolutely. So we've covered water, talked a little about rates. I mean, here's a story I'm thinking of last summer where Jim and I were both at this sweet corn grower, and he was fogging growers on once a week. Just 1 gallon, but once a week.
Yeah.
Excellent results. Very tasty sweet corn. And I think we have a peach grower that'll be using it here this spring to help with frost resistance. So foliar feeding applications being the product is so clean, very high quality in manufacturing ingredients, and then low heavy metal, very, very low heavy metal load compared to most of the industry. It's just a superior product to be put on that leaf surface.
Right.
Certainly we are proponents of using it in furrow or 2x2, but foliar feeding it just excels. It's a great.
Well, if you run into very bone dry weather and the crop is starting to struggle, I mean, spreading of dry material is not going to be very successful. It's really the only other option that you have. And
in that case, we're leveraging water as the universal solvent to get it into the plant. So that's
right.
Yeah, you've probably seen some of the best results in your career in dry conditions, right?
Yeah. No, during the 88 drought, guys you didn't make, the old saying is you didn't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. The deal was that you helped the plant deal with as much stress as possible so that when somebody was looking at maybe, 70 or 60 bushel yield, they could push it up over 100 bushel yield and see you've got options with the foliar. And see, farmers, in my opinion, tend to give up on a crop that gets under stress and they figure it's pretty well done. Well, Mother Nature has grown crops for quite a long time. She'll work with you if you give her help and help that crop try to overcome that stress period.
And you're making me think about, foliar feeding is a great timing. If you're in drought conditions like that, as I make my way around the country, there's quite a few of these reps and DMs and customers that'll cultivate even in that and put some oxygen in that soil and foliar feed as well. And what a perfect combination.
Yep. No. Well,
Stimulate
it's
the
all biological, in my opinion. In other words, there's been research that shows that the microbe that is in symbiosis with the plant will actually dehydrate itself and give the water to the plant for its success. And you would say, well, why would it do that? Because it's its only food source. So it has to work in that symbiotic relationship in order to survive. So embellishing that symbiosis or that symbiotic microbe it's paramount.
Yeah, and if the more we can do to exclude disease too, there's a lot of discussion about tar spot, white mold in the dry beans up in the thumb of Michigan. Vegetable operators are always talking about, of course, we want to build a system with good crop rotation, good cover crop rotation that feeds those microbes, and then stimulate that microbiological activity with the grower's product foliar.
Getting the right population, is the key. And, the number one factor is oxygen. So we get it aerobic and then don't offend it, let it do its job. And I think you can grow a very competitive crop with minimal amount of input, which is what the name of the game is now.
And there's plenty of proof in the growers network of some very high test weight, high sugar, sweetness, and quality of sweet corn, peaches that are holding off disease and resisting frost more than most. Yeah, it's oxygen. You're right. There's discussion in the food industry now about oxidative stress in fruit and vegetables, but they're degraded. They don't have as much oxygen in them, for a simple way to say it. The healthier they are, the more they'll last on the shelf.
No doubt about it.
Appreciate you all for joining us today. We've covered the growers' foliar feeding approach and the whole growers program. We talked about calcium, the importance of putting that in the soil to open it up and have more airspace to allow microbiology to live more. We talked about phosphorus versus calcium, other nutrients, the movement, stimulation of energy production by phosphorus. We talked about the water that we would mix growers with and various rates and various timings or applications. It's important to have clean water, low in TDS, and do that 15-to-1 test. And we talked about research, particularly Michigan State, et cetera. So with that, what a better way to grow a more economical crop and recover more ROI to the farm in today's markets. So with that, we'll...
This podcast has been brought to you by Growers Mineral. Please visit growersmineral.com.